Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Author Sheila Heti's latest Alphabetical Diaries is an ingenious and revelatory new work from the author of Pure Color, Motherhood, and How Should a Person Be? A decade's worth of thoughts arranged in alphabetical order. Heti's Alphabetical Diaries are passionate and reflective, joyful and despairing, indefinable, enthralling, and yes, very funny. A project 2 decades in the making, the book is a chronicle of the self, of the fundamentals and idiosyncrasies of the human experience that plays out in the space that Heti has staked out between life and art, reality and fiction. Sheila Heti is the author of 11 books. Her latest is Alphabetical Diaries, and it's a great pleasure to welcome her back to the book show. Thank you very much for being with us. What a delight to have you back.
Oh, thanks. It's really nice to be back.
Well, this is the coolest thing I've seen in a long time. I have so many questions about this book, and it's joyous. It's so much fun to read. It's a puzzle. It's really remarkable. What on earth were you thinking doing this?
Thank you first for the compliments. What was I thinking? I mean, I wanted to see what would happen if you took what was written as a chronological account and put the sentences in alphabetical order. And then I didn't think I was going to spend more than 10 years editing, but I did. Because what I first saw when I just sort of put them in alphabetical order using an Excel spreadsheet was interesting, but it became more interesting to me as I started taking sentences away and making the world of the book a little bit smaller and
Hmm.
seeing what the repetitions are and what the rhythms are.
It would seem to me when you start something like this that there have to be rules that you put in place for yourself of how you're going to go about this. For you, what were the rules?
So the rules were it had to remain in alphabetical order. I couldn't edit in such a way that would change the sentences too much. I wanted to sort of keep them as they'd been written for the most part. Later on, sort of 10 or 11 years into the editing, I let myself have a little bit more liberty with maybe the way that did the sentence begin with any way or did it not begin with any way? Maybe I could make the sentence a bit shorter for the sake of rhythm. But essentially, it was just keeping the sentences as they were written and not inventing any new ones, not writing any new ones.
Does it, by its very design, and we'll get to the very design in a moment, but by its very design, does it have a chronological arc to it, or wasn't that necessary?
It doesn't have a chronological arc. I try to, when I was editing, give some sense of characters coming back and scenes coming back. So you
Right.
remember, oh, right, she's in Paris or she's at this person's house. Certain things would kind of recall. But it's more like memory where you jump around a lot. You don't think about your life in chronological order.
So, for example, if you're talking about a book tour, or you're talking about touring, or you're talking about finishing a book or starting a book, that could be book number 5. That could have been book number 8.
Right.
I'm ashamed. Well, it only took me to about C before I figured this out, but I'm a little ashamed as to how long it took me to realize that not only were the chapters was the first letter of each word in alphabetical order, but that in each section of the book is in alphabetical order. That makes it seem all the more impressive. And that would seem to me to be somewhat limiting. As you said, you had a little leeway, but still to be able to pull that off is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a lot of cutting, really, because the book started out as 500,000 words and now it's 50,000. So, 10% is left. And with 10% left, you can make a certain kind of sense that you don't get when every sentence isn't there. So I was really focused on if you cut sentence two through nine and you have sentence one and 10 beside each other, like maybe there's a really interesting resonance between those two sentences. So instead of plot, now there's the pleasure of the surprise or the humor or the weirdness of certain sentences being sort of pushed up against each other.
So let's talk about the diary itself. So how did that start? Is that a form of journaling for you? Is how did that come to be, and then evolve into something that you would actually put into an Excel spreadsheet?
Well, I've kept a diary on and off through most of my life. And, in the last 20 years or so, I've written them on my computer. So they were already on the computer. And, um, it was very intermittent. It was kind of like if something big happened or if I needed to think something through or there was nobody I could talk to about something, I would write it in this journal. Um, and then in 2010, right after I published How Should a Person Be, I still had this desire to work and edit and write, but my book was done. And I don't know what happened, but I thought I have all this material, all these diaries, maybe I can sort of just keep editing, keep playing with this text. Maybe I could see how I, as a person, had been different like the last 10 years, because had I changed? How was I different from the character that I'd written myself into in my last book? So I had all these questions. And yeah, so I put all those diary entries into one document and then did a bunch of things. I put it into Excel and there's an A to Z function, so alphabetized it. But it wasn't the first time I did that. I had to do it over and over again over the years because I don't know, it just, it was very complicated.
I want to get into the editing process in a moment, but as far as the diaries go, does it give us, and it seems like it does, but it gives us sort of an out of context view of you. It's right. It's real. It's personal. It's just out of any linear context.
Yeah, that's right. And the characters are somewhat made up in the sense that I didn't want anyone reading the diary who had been in my life to be able to sort of track their character through the book and then say, "Oh, Sheila doesn't like me anymore," or whatever the sentence might have been. So I didn't change the sentences, but I at one point made all the male characters he and all the female characters she, and then I sort of built up new characters from those sentences. So the characters in the book are kind of like archetypes rather than individual people that I had in my life who could track themselves through the names.
With that said, when you're having a relationship, those moments in the book are incredibly personal. Do you write that at the moment, or do you work on that over time? Of how you're going to explain the relationship with that individual person, or even the sexual relationship with that particular person. Is it edited at all of how you felt at that moment of what went into the
No,
diary versus what went into the book?
no, no, I didn't change any sentences, their meaning or anything like that. And I tried to keep in the most interesting things. So it's not like there's all this
Oh,
delicious stuff left out.
oh, it's interesting.
Good.
It's fascinatingly interesting. What is it when you start something like that? Do you ever have misgivings? Like, do you ever get through, maybe to H and say, "Oh God, what was I thinking?"
Well, I jumped around a lot, so it wasn't like I did A and then I did B. But I don't think so because I wasn't sure I was going to publish it. Like it really started off as my boyfriend called it my procrastination project. It was just like a way of playing with words, editing, where it was kind of felt low stakes because I didn't know that it was going to be a book in the world. And I love editing. And it was just like a place to play and experiment and so no, I didn't really have any misgivings because I only let myself publish it when I was far enough along that the misgivings were long in the past. I actually thought about publishing it in 2013, and I'm glad I didn't because it was a completely different book then, and probably too close to the person I was at the time that I'd written the journals. Now it feels so far away.
The name of the new book is Alphabetical Diaries by Sheila Heti. If I'm a bookseller, I look at this and I think, well, is this literary? It's not literary fiction. It's essays. I don't know. How would you classify it?
I don't know either. I mean, in the UK they're calling it essays. In Canada they're calling it fiction. In America they're calling it, I think, literary miscellany or something like that. I don't think there is a classification.
That's cool to me. It's beyond classification. That seems like you've done something really special with that.
It would be nice if all three publishers could agree on what to call it. But I'm okay with anything. I mean, I just think that the word novel is a really useful word. It kind of can encompass anything. So I think of it as a novel, even though it's all real sentences from diaries.
Right. But you have always had a personal sense in your work. There's always been that very much a character of you in much of your work.
Yeah, this is probably less of a character than the others because, again, I didn't write any sentences that I hadn't written authentically for my
Right.
journal. So it's the closest to me.
Do you said a moment ago that you're glad it didn't come out in 2013
Yeah.
because this is further away now to who you are. Was that ever a worry as too much? You're revealing too much about yourself.
Yeah, I think, I published them in the New York Times as a series like a year and a half ago. And when that came out, I was really scared. I don't feel scared for the book coming out because it's already had an audience, but I felt like, yeah, I don't know what kind of person I'm revealing here because when I'm writing one of my other novels, I have a sense of the character I'm creating, but this, I don't know what kind of person is being revealed here quite so clearly. And, am I revealing myself as a very selfish person or am I revealing myself as a very whatever, you do fear. Yeah, I did have all those feelings.
And maybe I'm wrong about this, but going back to the one of the first questions I asked you was about the arc and that there wasn't a chronological arc. So with that in mind, it does seem that there are many versions of you throughout the book. We see you at different times in different places. It can be contradictory.
Yes. But there is something I think that stays the same. And I think that's what was interesting to me about this, that you can sort of take 10 years and put them in alphabetical order, and there's still this character that persists, or there's this way of the mind working that persists, or certain preoccupations. So I actually have this sense of myself and the self being like a much more static kind of thing than I would have thought before this project.
You think much more in reading it. I used the word puzzle earlier, and I would think it would have been a puzzle for you to put together. I don't know if that's an accurate word or not, but for me as a reader, it was a puzzle to just see how you would go from always to am. So I'm always checking my checkbook. Always, I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, and then going to am checking email once a day. So
Mhm.
just when you make that switch from one letter to the next, and how many times you'll use one word as opposed to another, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, what are the sentences that you start with always? What are the sentences that you start with yet or anyway or but or yeah, it's interesting to see how many sentences start with I hate, I better not, you get a real picture of yourself.
When you see the picture of yourself, at what point does that become clear to you in the sense of, oh, okay, this is the picture I'm creating of me, or this is the picture of me.
I mean, I think it's both all the way along. But the creating is like making it interesting because too much repetition. I had a real question of how long the book should be, how many words. I think too much repetition would have gotten boring. I wanted to keep it sort of short and yeah, so that there's variation and there's repetition, but there's not like the sense of, okay, I've heard this sentence 100 times before. Um, I really wanted the pace to be quick.
There's a lot in here, not surprisingly, about writing, about the art of writing, about thoughts on writing. And when you're actually doing the diary and writing, how is that helpful for you to understand how you're feeling that moment about chapters or about paperbacks or about paragraphs or whatever the case may be?
I mean, it's really helpful because when you're writing a book, and my books usually take 5 or 6 years to write it, or seven, or anyways, you go through so many phases, and so many times you're so discouraged, and I felt like it's useful for me to be able to look back at other books and say, oh, for 6 months, I thought I was going to throw this book out. Like, it's just useful to have a record because whatever state you're in with the book, you feel like it's going to go on forever and you forget all the other states. Well, it's not just like that with the book. It's like that with anything in life. You kind of always think that whatever you're feeling right now is eternal and it's never going to change. So especially with book writing, though, it's useful because you can get really discouraged.
Has it changed given that you've looked at it and you've looked at it closely and you have edited it and you have gone through sentence by sentence, does it change the way that you write a diary now?
Not really. I mean, I don't even write in the diary that much anymore. And in fact, I've been listening to the audiobook. They sent it to me a couple of weeks ago, and Kate Berlant, the comic, reads the audiobook. And I've been listening to it in the car, and it almost feels like I don't need to write a diary anymore because all the things that I still think I have written down. I'm not having any new thoughts that I had, than the thoughts I had 15 years ago, which is sort of interesting. So it's it's like a really interesting reflection. And I feel less bad about the things that I'm going through because I just think, well, those are just the things you go through. Like that's just your characteristic experience happening again.
Right. It's part of it. I listened to the audio. I read the galley, which interestingly didn't have the letter Z.
Right.
And then and then when I listened to the audio, well, Z was added, and and some things changed. It was great, and she's an amazing reader. And but is that a surreal experience for you to hear some of your deepest thoughts coming out of the car speakers?
Yes, which is what I would never do it with anybody else in the car because it's horribly embarrassing that I'm doing this at all. But it's just been so interesting and fun to hear it. Kate's a friend of mine, and I know the stuff that has happened in her life, the dramas that she's gone through, and to hear the sentences, I think, oh, this sentence meant this to me, but it means something different in Kate's life, and it also has a meaning in her life. Obviously, referring to different people, but it was fun to listen to her say certain sentences and think about what they meant for her.
I was also really interested and thought it was fascinating of the lines that you added that I say added, but were not maybe part of the story or of the moment, but were in there, such as you're talking about your writing. You're talking about what is going on at a particular moment. This is in the P chapter. And then you come to this line, which I love because I know this place very well. It's not far from my home. Patricia Highsmith lost her virginity at Yaddo. I didn't know that. All these years, I've done program after program about that, and I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was at Yaddo and somebody told me that, and that's why I got in there.
But that's something, well, that you, I assume, through the editing process say, oh, well, this fits. I could throw that in, and that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's nice to keep sentences in there that aren't just about me.
Yeah. And
Mix it up a
there are
bit.
many moments like that where they're just sort of some random thoughts that are really fun and maybe even divert your attention for a moment. Don't look at what's going on over there. Here, now look at what's going on over here.
What's kind of how the mind works. It jumps around a lot, and you're thinking about your problems, and then you think about this fact, and then it just sort of like a portrait of how thought is.
Sheila Heti is our guest. The new book is Alphabetical Diaries, and it is out from FSG. I keep coming back to this, and I'm just fascinated. I guess I find it very interesting, and don't know that I would ever. You have to be a certain type of person to want to, even with a little distance, to want to share these feelings with others. And I guess if you were to say it's a novel that would give you a little distance, but you aren't doing that, which is I mean, I think it's more honest, right?
Mhm. I don't know that there's anything in there that other people haven't felt or thought. I mean, I don't feel like we're all that different from each other. So I don't really feel like here's some embarrassing thing that I'm revealing. It's just like, well, this is what it's like to be a person and
No,
this.
there's certainly nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just what we want people to know, what we don't want people to know, and which I guess you still obviously have agency over in this.
Yeah, there's a lot that's not in there. But I think mostly it's like I never get the feeling that the reader will ever meet me. So what difference does it make? I was nervous when my boyfriend read the book. I was like, is he gonna still like me after he reads the book? That's more what my nervousness is around.
And but everything's fine, right? You're okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
He worked this morning. I think he'll come home tonight.
The to your knowledge, has anything ever been done like this before?
No, I don't think so.
So what was the pitch like to the publishers? Did that
Um,
go easily?
yeah, actually, kind of. Well, in 2013, like I said, I sent it to Jacques Testard, who's the publisher of Fitzcarraldo in the UK, and the book was 6 times as long, and every sentence was on its own line. It wasn't a long paragraph the way it is now, and um, he loved it, and I was stunned. I was really surprised, and that just actually gave me the feeling like, okay, this can be a book, which is good for the because I continued to work on it for so long. It was good to have that in my mind, like his belief. It's such a good publishing house that I just felt like, yeah, the pitch wasn't too hard. I guess.
I mean, as easy as any pitch is, right? Of deciding what you're going to do next.
Like I said, like I just didn't know what form it was going to end up in. I thought it was going to be possibly an internet project at one point where every sentence was going to be on it. It just kept changing form until it found this final form.
To my understanding and the reading of the final product, the only letter not to appear is X.
That's correct. And I thought maybe I could make some of these names start with an X and then I could have an X chapter. But then I thought, well, that's a little silly.
Yeah. I mentioned that in the early galley, Z was not included. Was that just something that you were working on, or would there always be a Z?
Well, not to give it away, but like the last chapter always was a sentence about Zadie Smith. And I think with the reason it wasn't in the galley was I just wanted to actually check with her and just make sure that she was okay with it. And so I just didn't put it in the galley. But it was always the book always ended up with Zadie Smith at the
Yeah,
end.
and as mentioned earlier in the book as well,
Yeah.
the longest chapter is I.
Yes, necessarily. It's a
Yeah,
diary.
that's right. But it isn't always. Not everything starts with I am, although quite a bit is obviously.
Yeah, I did. I was thinking, yeah, there's a lot. And I split into two parts because there's I, and then there's all the words that start with I, like instead or if or so I wanted to sort of break up I if I could.
There's something about the form when you see, even as a kid, if you see an ABC book and it's ABC barn animals or whatever,
Yeah.
okay, that's what it's going to be. And even when I see this of Alphabetical Diaries, I think, oh, okay, well then even I can figure this out because we're going to start with A, we're going to end with Z, and there you go.
Yeah.
There's a structure there that's just implicit that seems to make things a little bit easier for the reader.
Yeah, it's an easy to explain book. It's certainly easier to explain than a lot of books I've
Oh,
written.
what is so how do you come out of this in the sense of when you're done with something like this of because you're obviously writing other things while you were working on this, and now you'll write other things. So what is that process like once you're out of that? I mean, do you easily come out of the alphabetical mindset?
Yeah, it's more that so the earliest diary entries are from 2005. So in a sense, I've been writing this book for 20 years. And I think I just feel a little nervous. Like, what happens when you finish a book that you've been working on for 20 years? Like, is your life going to change really dramatically all of a sudden because this phase is done, from 25 to 45? Every time I finish a book, I feel like my life kind of changes in some way. So I'm,
Hmm.
I'm sort of bracing myself. I'm hoping everything doesn't fall apart.
Well, I'm sure it won't, but it brings up another point, which is, do you like having a project to work on for that period of time? Like there's the short term and then there's the long term. That you have something that's brewing, whatever the format may be, that it's something that you work over a long period of time.
Yeah, I think it won't be too long before something comes to fill in that space. I like having multiple things going on at once because I don't always feel like working on the main thing, but I like working. So it's good to have different kinds of projects simultaneous.
So just to pick up on what you just said, what was not fun about this process, this project?
I, I think that it was really hard to keep in my mind what sentences were in the book because you usually you remember what sentences are in your book because sentences describe certain scenes and the scenes are chronological. But with this, it's just hundreds of random sentences in a random order, essentially. It's very hard to remember it's hard to remember what's in there. And so it's hard to know what to keep in there and what to cut out. So that was really, that was kind of a pain.
After 15 years of looking at stuff that again goes back to 2005, let's say, do you ever look at it and assuming you're a type of person who allow yourself this bonus in life where you can look at it and say, oh, damn, that's pretty good. That's a good sentence.
I mean, I really like the book. I think that it turned out I'm very happy with it. I'm surprised that I feel like this because again, it was such a long process and it could have ended up in so many different forms, but I do feel really good about it.
And I just can't imagine, and I don't know if you even have a sense of how much didn't make it into the book. I mean, there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sentences, I assume, that didn't make it.
Yeah, and then there's the ones that like almost made it, which are more, heartbreaking because I did a huge edit at one point. I cut out like 20,000 words last year, and then I went on vacation or something, or book tour. I don't know. I was out of the country. I came back and I looked again at all the stuff I'd cut, and I was sort of terrified that I'd cut so many things that I realized I shouldn't have cut. So I put all those ones back in, and yeah, more I think about the ones that I cut, and then at the last minute was like, oh, those actually should be in the book.
And it's nice that you're happy with it now with the decisions that you made.
Yes, I am. It is nice.
The book is really fun and just such an enjoyable and unique read and as well as an exercise. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. It's really great stuff. The new book is Alphabetical Diaries by Sheila Heti. It is published by FSG. Sheila, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I love talking to you.
Again, Sheila Heti's latest is Alphabetical Diaries. It is published by FSG. Thanks to our producer, Sarah LeDuc. Write to us at book@wamc.org. The latest on National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at wamc.org and on social media at WAMC Radio. Bookmark us for next week, and thanks for listening. For The Book Show, I'm Joe Donahue.